My name is Jill Coyle, and welcome to another episode of No One Dies from Divorce, where we talk the nitty-gritty aspects of divorce and help each other come through this not only surviving, but thriving. I'm a divorce attorney, and I'm interviewing other experts and people just like you who are going through or have been through a divorce, so you can have the latest and greatest information on all things before, during, and after divorce. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of No One Dies from Divorce. You guys, this episode is called Let's Talk About Sex, and I am so excited. My guest today, Celeste Holbrook, Dr. Celeste Holbrook. Hi, say hello. We're so excited because
Hi, everybody.
We were talking about how we're going to play this song, let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. And we realized that there are kids out there that have never heard that song before. And I was like, oh man, this dates us. We're like,
yep, that's okay.
Those 40-year-olds that love that kind of stuff. But we are here today to remember No One Dies from Divorce is all about empowering ourselves to become a better version than what we were, so that when we move past this trial of divorce or whatever you're going through, that you're going to become a better whole person, and you're going to have the keys and the tools to show up in any relationship post-divorce, a better version of yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, because if you don't think sex is a major issue that we have to deal with when dealing with our value and worthiness of ourselves, but then also our value and worthiness of relationships, then you've got another thing. And so, Dr. Celeste Holbrook, you are here to talk about this subject that I think so many people want to talk about, but they're so scared to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just excited to have you here to kind of shine a light on this. And I want to tell you, I'm going to introduce you a little bit. So Dr. Celeste Holbrook is a sexologist and a speaker who helps her clients embrace and understand their sexual self. She speaks on a variety of topics, from sex drive and sexual shame to painful intercourse and purity culture. Her mission is to provide safe spaces for people to talk about sex. You can find her teaching classes for the Velvet Box or at the website at www.drcelesteholbrook.com. And you can sign up for a 30-minute discovery call with Dr. Celeste on her website at that and find everything else that you need. Thank you, Celeste, for being here.
Thank you, Jill, for having me. And I just want to say this is so lovely to be on podcasts, because my mission is to provide safe spaces for people to talk about sex. Podcasts are one of the best way to do that, because you just listen and you can kind of garner and get the information you need about sensitive subjects like sex without feeling like you're reading a book about blowjobs on the train or something like that.
And you don't have to worry about what other people are, if they're listening or seeing what you're reading. Exactly. Or whatnot. I remember when I was a kid, like my sex information was brought to you by either, like MTV or, whatever I saw on TV, or from Cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
I remember as a young college student reading Cosmopolitan and doing like a survey about like, what the survey would be like, what kind of sex do you like, or something like that. And coming from a very Christian, girl who was taught that you don't have sex before marriage, it was one of those things where you're like, oh, I can learn everything I need to learn from a magazine.
Right.
What's the problem with that, Celeste? What have you seen with our culture and the reason why sex is what I would say is the great lie? It's the great deceitful lie. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. One of the things that is problematic about how we see sex online, in media, TV, movies, is that sex is always performed. Like, that is the way in which we interpret sex. Right. It is the only thing in our life that we only see performed. Like, we see Fast and Furious and we see crazy driving, but we get modeled appropriate driving by our parents or caregivers or whatever. Sex is the one thing we never get modeled appropriately.
Oh, doesn't
So,
that make you cringe right now to think, oh my gosh, could you imagine having to watch your parents have sex to learn the proper way to have
right,
sex?
which would also be problematic, but we have to understand or filter for ourselves that
Yeah.
the only sex we ever see is performed always 100% of the time. And so we think that our own sex lives needs to be performed in this certain way. In reality, the best sex is experienced, it's not performed.
Right. Right. Which has its problems because like we said, we're seeing it on everywhere, social media, we're seeing it on television. And then if you've actually had sex, you know that those two realities do not coexist. They are completely different. The other thing that we know is that when it comes to what you need with your sexual being, whatever that is never going to be exactly the same as somebody else.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where it's like almost like a learned trait. It's like if you're learning basketball, you're going to go through the skills, you're going to go through they're going to teach the same thing to every kid. And you're going to be able to then become, the basketball player that your body is capable of being. But sex, that's not the way it is. But just like you said, it's one of the it is something that needs to be talked about, needs to be discussed. It needs to be something that we understand what the importance is because it affects every part of our life, whether we want to say that or not.
Yeah, I totally agree that. And that's why I love being in this career because I feel like if you can garner your confidence and your worth in a space where you are really organically the most vulnerable, like you are naked with somebody, right?
Right.
If you can garner confidence in that area, you can go ask for a raise. You can go, stand up to the boardroom and do your presentation.
Yeah.
You can be a badass parent, So I think that this really vulnerable organic space of sex is powerful in that way.
Right. And if I would, it's interesting as a divorce attorney for 15 years, I've talked about where I basically can have somebody come into my office and I can pretty much hear the facts of their case and figure out exactly what was kind of going wrong in their marriage to start with and why a divorce makes sense for them. You've heard statistically wise, the two most major reasons for divorce are going to come down to sex and money. I mean, that's a very generalization of that, but somehow it's going to fall within that somehow. And, but it's one of those things where when people come into my office, sometimes they'll kind of express a little bit about their sexual intimacy and what was wrong with that. But they're never going to go into the details of what really got to the bottom of that. And so when we're talking about divorce, if you're sitting here listening to us and you're like, okay, I'm going through a divorce or I've been through a divorce, most likely you're going to have a thought of something was wrong in this space, in the sex or the intimacy of our relationship. And so our goal here today is to say, okay, let's step back. Let's kind of evaluate that. And let's find out exactly what you were lacking or were, not feeling worthy of or, your self-confidence issues. And let me and Celeste be the ones to get you to the point where you can start, fixing that or, feeling like, okay, this is what I was lacking in my marriage, and therefore I don't want that lacking going forward. And so that's kind of our goal today with our episode is we want to inspire you to recognize that you are worthy of being the best version of yourself. And if that means having the best sex of your life, whether that's with yourself or not, and we'll get to that a little bit, you deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I wanted to just ask you is, what do you think is one of the biggest issues couples have in their relationships and or marriages regarding sex?
Yeah. So everybody that comes to see me specifically has sex issues, right? So I'm seeing this like microcosm of problems. The number one thing that I see is mismatched arousals, or another word to say that would be sex drives.
Right.
One partner wants more sex, one partner doesn't want as much sex or doesn't get aroused for sex. So that's by far the number one thing that I see for sure.
How this is an interesting question because okay, you have mixed sex drives. That was a major issue in the marriage, and now they're divorced. A lot of times, on your first date, you're not going to ask somebody like, "Hey, what's your sexual arousal preferences?"
Mm-hmm.
But what would be some advice you would give people wanting to evaluate that? Because that is a question you should have answered before you get married. You should be able to kind of evaluate that and make sure you guys are sexually compatible. Do you have some advice for our listeners on being able to figure that out?
Yeah, so this is kind of a big question, and I want to start here. One of the biggest lies we're told about sex is that it is natural. Okay?
Right.
Sex is biological, we are built for pleasure, we are built for reproduction, but it's not natural. Just like we're built to eat food, you still have to learn how to cook food so you want to eat it.
Right.
So we're told this lie that sex is natural and that if you're just going to naturally want it, or you're just going to naturally be good at it if you're compatible, right? And I'm going to push back against this idea of sexual compatibility, because if we truly believe that sex is a learned skill like cooking, you can get better at it throughout the
Yes.
course of your life, and you can learn to get better at it together. And so if sex isn't, you're not clicking in some way, shape, or form at first, it is something that you can work on and get better at. And it's a skill set that you want to learn to get better at, because over the course of your life, your arousal is going to change. You're going to maybe have kids or have a diagnosis that's really hard, or you lose the ability to um, get an erection, or there's just so many things that impact our sex lives that the ability to think of it as a learned skill is paramount in having a sex life that's beautiful and intimate and pleasurable and connective over a long-term relationship. But I think we do such a
Yeah.
disservice to people when we just say that there's something called sexual compatibility and it's binary, like you are compatible or
Or
you
you're
aren't
not.
compatible,
Yep.
right? There's like, if that's an A and a Z, there's a whole lot of other letters in between that you can learn how to be together. So that's kind of the first misnomer
Yeah.
that I think is really important, is that sex is a learned skill and you can learn how to be better at it, and more compatible based on which partner you are currently with or with yourself, right?
I love that because it's just like communication. We talk so much about communication on my podcast, about how it is a learned trait and it's an evolution. Like you
Yes.
have to continually learn to communicate with people, and especially with your spouse, right? Because it's always going to change. There's always going to be challenges. And I think it goes right back into that. If you can learn to communicate with your spouse or
Mm-hmm.
your partner, then you're able to learn to communicate about this subject specifically.
Right.
And you're right. Our tastes change. Like, what you liked 5 years ago for sex and intimacy is not something you like now. Our weight changes, which
Right.
makes sometimes sexual things have to change. And so I think this goes right into play with that you have to be willing to learn to communicate these issues with each other, because you can work together to make it really great
What
in
a fun
whatever.
exploration,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
and that's what makes it challenging and fun at the same time, is that we are ever evolving in our relationships, and we're ever evolving in our sexual, compatibility with each other. Just like you said, you don't love that word, because I agree with you. Whoever designed the whole ability for man, woman, man, woman, woman, whatever your situation is, to have sex with each other, I don't know if they necessarily like really thought that out, because it is so hard.
Yeah.
it is not something that's just going to come easy with you. And if you were raised in a super Christian home like me,
Mm-hmm.
Celeste was as well,
Mm-hmm.
where you are taught no sex, no sex, no sex, you then need to get married. And then once you're married, it's done for reproductive purposes. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, go. And you're like, wait, I thought sex was supposed to be fun. This sucks.
Yes. So that is exactly my story. I got married when I was 26 and I had waited to have penetrative sex until I was married, had sex for the first time, and it was terrible. It was painful.
Yep.
And I was like, I waited for this, you know, and that was the beginning of my career because I spent the whole first year of my marriage just really struggling and feeling so angry
Yeah.
and resentful and ashamed that I wasn't living up to this vixen type woman who, I was told I was supposed to be. And so that's really where my career started because I sex educated myself out of that pain and I deconstructed a lot of those negative sex messages that I got growing up, so my body could relax into sex. Like, really,
Yeah.
what was going on with my body was I was told my whole life that sex was dangerous. I mean, that was implicit messaging, but I was told that I was going to be unwanted. I was going to go to hell. I was going to,
Yep.
nobody was going to want me if I had sex. And all of this was like before marriage. But your body doesn't know dates or timelines. It just hears this idea that sex is dangerous. And so it did what it's supposed to do, and the only purpose of your body is to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And so it shut down my arousal system. And so sex was painful because I wasn't aroused for sex. And so me educating myself and giving myself better messaging around sex, I sex educated myself out of pain. And so that's why I'm so passionate about sex education because it really can change the course of your life and your sex life and your relationships, right?
Right. Especially because I was raised in a very Christian church, and it with a patriarchal society, and the fact that it was ingrained that sex was for me to have babies, and it was also ingrained that sex was to pleasure men.
Right.
And so when I'm here thinking, well, isn't sex supposed to be pleasurable for both parties? I mean, it was absolutely that, fallacy or that lie that I was like believing to make it so that it was not an enjoyable experience for myself.
Exactly.
And, as a young married person who in her mind had concocted this illusion that my first year of marriage was just going to be some amazing experience of sex and doing, that it was so challenging. And
Yeah.
just like you, Celeste, I mean, my mission on life is to empower others to recognize their value and their worthiness. And I didn't have anybody telling me that I was worthy of, enjoying sex and that sex is supposed to be pleasurable for me. And that's frustrating. So if I can lend, a little bit of love and support to our listeners in the fact that we are, me and Celeste are telling you right now that you are worthy of this. Like, you are worthy of good sex, of understanding that you are, it's for both parties to understand their, and enjoy, and that it's not one dominant of, as long as this person enjoys it, then I'm good. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And if you're in an imbalanced sexual relationship right now where it is always the one person that gets enjoyment out of it, without turning around and ensuring that the other party, then you're in a very sexual dominant relationship that's not fair. And I would say is something that you need to, I guess, open your eyes to, and it's not okay.
Yeah. And so I want to speak into that just a little bit because here's another thing that people come to the table with, which is maybe a misnomer. People will come into the practice and say, we just have really different sex drives. And I say, welcome to the club.
Right.
Because there's not two people on this earth who want sex in the same way, with the same amount of arousal in the same positions, at the same time. Zero people, zero couples are like that.
Right.
Um, and so sex is always a negotiation of what do you want? What do you want? How does this feel? How do you want to do this? Would this be okay right now? So the idea of mismatched sex drive is just a human experience. Like we all have our own personal way in which we like sex. But the problem becomes when the people who had the authority to write about and to speak out about sex for the vast majority of time, they own penises.
Yeah.
And so we have this kind of very odd look at arousal. If you think about mismatch arousals, maybe the penis owner in a relationship wants more sex and the clitoris owner in a relationship doesn't have as high of a sex drive. We tend to say she has low sex drive, not he has hypo sex drive.
Right. Yeah.
So we're looking through a male lens, a penis owner's lens of arousal even. And so if we can strip away some of that like conditioning that we've had, then we can see like, nope, they're just two different arousals and not one is better than the other. And our work is to negotiate how we both find intimacy, connection, and pleasure with what we have.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's continued conversation of what both parties need and then being willing to do that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to pivot to this because I think this is really important. I want you to talk a little bit about the difference between intimacy and sex.
Yeah. So here's how I describe it. And I think there's a lot of different ways to describe the difference between intimacy and sex. I'd love to hear your kind of take on it too. But I see intimacy as a big umbrella.
Yep.
A really big umbrella.
Yes.
And sex is just one little slot that falls underneath this big umbrella of intimacy. So sex allows for intimacy. It can help us feel intimate. But to be honest, some of the most intimate times I've had with my partner are like talking about the future or like planning for retirement or, going through hard things together. So intimacy tends, in my definition, tends to be this overarching thing and we can get there utilizing multiple, behaviors.
I love that because what I see is that the intimacy is the necessary of a marriage, of a healthy marriage. You have to have that umbrella. And then however you have under that umbrella is then these subparts to making that intimacy work. Because my love language is I love physical touch and quality time together.
Yeah.
So you put my husband next to me on a couch watching a movie with his hand on my leg. And to me, that is filling my cup of intimacy. I need that. And that's it. And so a lot of us like to think that sex is the important factor to the intimacy part of our marriage. And I just want to push back and say, I don't agree with that. And I love that you basically gave me an analogy that now I'm going to use for the rest of my life in helping us understand that it's more important to understand the needs of the intimacy relationship and then fill that with whatever little bits, fit you. And we talk about love languages a lot just because it's an easy guide to really try to start understanding relationships and what your partner needs. It's not perfect. It's, it's not proven to be like the fix of all relationships, but it's a start. And so if you understand what your partner needs based under these love languages, you can then make a more concerted effort to really meet that. My husband, his love language is not the same as mine. His love language is words of affirmation. And that's hard for me. I don't know why I struggle so much, but it is something I have to concertedly think about to remind him that I'm grateful for what he does and to actually say, thank you, or I hear you. because it's not enough for me to be looking at him. He needs those words of affirmation. And so I think that goes really big into what we always are talking about of how we can be better, show up better in our relationships, is understanding what the other person needs and then doing doing what we can to meet that. And so that's what I love about talking about the difference between intimacy and sex, is that you have to know what does your partner need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that conversation. Sorry, am I interrupting?
No. Go. I love this.
Okay. I love that conversation about love languages, because the way I describe it is your love language help you foster empathy, right?
Yeah.
If my love language is acts of service and my partner's love language is words of affirmation, right? It helps me take a walk in their foreign country. Like, it's like I walk in their foreign country and words of affirmation is hard for me because I don't speak that language and all the signs are different and it's an effort for me.
Yeah.
But it's so beautiful. You have a great experience in that other country. It's still hard. And I think that's what people maybe misunderstand about sex or relationships, is that, there will become a point where it's just not hard anymore. And I just don't think that's necessarily true. Like, it becomes maybe faster to get to where you want to go, but it's still always a walk in a country that's not your own. Like, that is a definition of relationship. And so when we think about that type of empathy when it comes to arousal, I like to teach people about arousal frameworks. So an arousal framework is, these are the things that the doorways that I need to walk through in order for my arousal to show up. Like, I need some time without the kids, or I want to make sure that the bed is made before I get in it, or I need a conversation with you before we start touching,
Yeah.
And so being able to understand your partner's arousal frameworks, even though you don't necessarily need those things, is really important in helping us connect sexually, because you're showing me that you're willing to walk in my country in order to show me that you love me and that you are willing to connect with me in this intimate way. So a thing that we talk about a lot is like chore play.
Yeah.
Right. So
yes, do the dishes for me, and that's sexy.
Yeah, it's sexy. And sometimes we're like, is that just like, trying to pay for sex in some way? But I want you to think about it in a different way. Like, if responsibility is the biggest killer of arousal, then the opposite is true. If my partner can help me lift some of those responsibilities, then all of a sudden arousal is easier to access, right? So it's not that you're paying for sex by doing the dishes. It is literally that you are taking some of those responsibilities out of my head so that my eroticism has a turn to play in my head. And it's not like, okay, after we finish this, I got to go do the dishes. Right.
And it's taking it one step next, is that you're saying, I'm doing this because I hear you and I see what you need. I love that. And it's so funny because I feel like a lot of my podcasts are just therapy sessions for myself. I'm like, what can I do? I need to be doing better at this. Because the other thing about understanding love languages and is that if you don't know yours and what you need, how is your spouse or your partner ever going to know that as well? And so a lot of this journey is trying to do self-discovery on what you need. And we've said this a lot, is that a lot of times in marriage, we tend to just put our head down and we stop thinking, what do I need? Because we're taking care of everybody else, whether it's our spouse, our kids, our job. And so we start going through these motions and we forget exactly what do I need to become this whole person. And so, what better time to do it than a divorce, when you no longer have to worry about that spouse and you just have to worry about you. And I hear a lot, like, people are like, well, I have kids. I can't just start thinking about myself. And I'm like, absolutely you can. And your kids are deserving of that, because your kids are missing out on you. because you're
Mhm.
not you and you don't even know what you need to become this whole happy, healthy person. So your kids are actually getting a disservice by you not knowing what you need. So right now at this time when you're going through this hard experience in your life, you really do need to look inward. And you need to figure out, what are my love languages? What is my country? What is my signs? What
Mhm.
do I need? And you have to be able to articulate that. And
Yeah.
whether you need to go to therapy to talk about that, to figure that out, whether you want to read books, you listen to our podcast, whatever you need to do to figure that out. But this is the time to do that. And I can promise you this. I don't promise a lot because promises is something that I'm saying, hey, this is what will happen. But I can promise you, if you can figure out what you need, you will become a better version of yourself. I
Yep.
promise that. And that's what we want. That's what, through any trial, that's exactly what our goal should be, is what can I learn from this so that I can become a better version. So, anyways, I love that.
Yeah. And one of the things that comes up sometimes when people have been recently, separated or divorced out of a relationship, and they'll say, I want to work on my sex life, but I don't have a partner. How am I supposed to work on my sex life when I don't have a partner? And I'm like, this is the best time to work on your
Yes.
sex life because it is all about you.
Yeah.
And you actually don't have to think about the needs or the desires of a partner. You can clearly hear your own voice and hear your own body saying, these are the things that I like. These are the things that I don't like. And so being single is actually a very beautiful time to work on your own sexuality and learn what it is that you like and that you don't like. And like the harder work of unpacking that backpack you've been carrying of
Yeah.
those sexual messages that you were told that you were supposed to be this way or that way. I always say that we have a backpack that we carry that's filled with all of these messages we get about sex. And
Yep.
the deconstruction process is taking off the backpack, unloading the thing, going, okay, don't need this, don't need this. This is trauma. It
Yep.
has to go back in. I can never leave it behind, but I can carry it down low. It doesn't have to be at the top of the backpack where I'm like, makes me unsteady.
Yeah.
Right. So the process of deconstructing kind of some past messages about sex is the process of unloading it all, seeing what's in there, and then packing it better so you can manage it well in the next trail, quotes, or the next relationship.
I love that. And this goes right into, I want to get right down to this because American culture, mainstream sex, they mainstream, sexuality. It's all in our faces everywhere we go. Um, they suck at intimacy. Mainstream culture just doesn't help us understand intimacy. But what is frustrating is that when you have people, that, okay, I'm going through a breakup, I don't have a partner. Now what? I can't learn about sex. What, you don't see culture talking about that it's okay for you to be single and to explore sexuality.
Yeah.
Masturbation, oh, heaven forbid. That's like a censor on my mouth.
Right.
Talking about it. It's like so taboo in American culture, but yet it is so mainstream. If you want to believe that your teenage boys aren't masturbating or that your girls aren't thinking about it, whatever you're teaching in your home, then you need to probably check yourself. And, like it's just, that's a type of denial that I think is causing and perpetuating this sex problem in America.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to talk about that. Like, what's your thoughts about that, and why? Why are we still in the 21st century going, ooh, masturbation? Don't do that.
Yeah. And I think that the prevalence of, performed sexual behavior in pornography or media makes it look like you always need a partner, and makes it look like it's really easy. So you don't have to learn about it, right? Back to this sex is natural
Yeah.
misnomer. And what we often don't think about is things like informed consent. So whenever we use the term consent in sex or anywhere really, you're the attorney, you tell me. Or anywhere, we really need to say informed consent. Consent always has to be informed. But when we don't know information about our body, can we really give informed consent for somebody else to touch or, erotically be with our body. And so it's not just that masturbation helps us understand what we like and what we don't like. It is literally fundamentally your ethical kind of responsibility to know about your body so that you can give consent, informed consent, to somebody else to participate in sex with you.
Right.
So I don't, I think masturbation is much more taboo or I don't know, not well talked about among women or clitoris owners. Um, it's certainly just kind of accepted that penis owners masturbate, but
Yeah.
because of our rich history and puritanical law and patriarchy, we just, you know, for women, we haven't encouraged this, and this kind of creates this gap in pleasure for women as we age, and
Yeah.
we kind of only catch up as we get older. And so, you see the statistics about how women have reached their sexual peak in their 30s and 40s, and I kind of have to wonder if we taught masturbation practices and shame-free, comprehensive, pleasure-focused, trauma-informed sex education from the very beginning, maybe we wouldn't peak at all, and maybe we would have more pleasurable sex way earlier than that. But it's because we don't have that, and we're just kind of learning it in our 30s and 40s that, oh, like all of a sudden, like I know how to have an orgasm, and I know how to please myself, and I know how to ask for what I want, and I have the confidence to speak my mind in sex.
Well, and it just makes me laugh because you've just watched the movies and they're having shower sex, and they're standing up, and you have this woman
It's
that's
so
like
hard.
so pleasurable and enjoying it. I'm like, this is such a lie. It's just a lie. It's perpetuating, and I think you're absolutely right. I talk a lot about the patriarchal society and the fact, I mean, American culture has just gone straight down this with our, Christian, basis and beliefs, and it has sidelined women in believing that they're deserving of a pleasurable experience with sex, and that's just dumb. It's just
Yeah.
it's just a bad belief. And I absolutely agree that if a woman's not enjoying sex, then it's going to get to a point where a woman doesn't need sex. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll just say that. So,
Yeah.
so if you men out there or whoever you're with your partner, and you're not hearing and seeing and understanding what the needs of your spouse or your partner are needing, then it's not going to be at the pinnacle of what you guys need to flourish and have a healthy sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a 40, I'm going in my 40s, and this year I'm 39, and thinking, is this it? Is this the best I got? I love you, Ryan. I love you so much. But that's, and I want to be that sounding board for other women or men, even, to recognize that no, that's not it. That's not it. You are worthy of understanding that you're more than whatever your spouse is perpetuating on you.
Yeah.
But if you're
Yes.
not able to communicate what you need, what you want,
Yes.
that's hard.
That's really hard. And it goes right on down to, even like, it has really, really strong roots, this patriarchy idea. It goes right on down to how we define sex, right? We define sex in a very heteronormative, male-centered way of penis goes into a vagina.
Yes.
Whereas 98% of the sex that we have is for pleasure. And we know that most clitoris owners have their first and most of their orgasms through clitoral stimulation, which is outer course.
Yep.
And yet we still define sex as penis going into a vagina, even though that is, studied, not the most pleasurable way to have sex for most clitoris owners.
Yes.
So just the very definition that many people have of sex is skewed toward the pleasure of penis owners. So continuing to rethink your own definitions of sex, even maybe sex maybe you're in Germany deployed and I'm in Texas and you're touching your genitals and I'm touching my genitals. And it's a beautiful, intimate, pleasurable experience. So that could be a definition of sex for you.
Yeah.
So being willing as a couple to open up your idea of like what behaviors actually are defined as sex can be incredibly helpful in having a long-term sexual relationship.
Yeah. How do we get over the, especially in these Christian religious societies where if you masturbate, you'll get into pornography and then you'll get addicted and then you'll have a sex addiction and therefore then, you'll become this horrible person. Like, how do we overcome the understanding that that's not true? And
I mean, being willing to even just have that conversation with yourself and start to, something we do in my practice is a full deconstruction. So I'll ask clients, how did you learn about sex? Who told you? What were the trusted adults in your life that you could ask sex questions to? What was the information you got? Was it reproductive centered? Was it pleasure centered? Did you get anything at all? Right? So here's a very good place for most of our listeners to start is just kind of write down your sexual messaging history. Like where did your sex education come from?
right.
And start to kind of poke holes in that. Like, man, nobody ever told me that women could have orgasms. I learned that when I was in college, right?
Right.
Or nobody ever told me that it was okay to touch myself. In fact, people told me absolutely that it was a selfish, lustful thing to do. And so now I'm having to learn it in my adulthood, right?
Yep.
So starting to poke holes in those, that sounds kind of sexual, but
right.
in those sex messages is one of the ways in which we move through and manage, because we can't ever get rid of our past, but we can manage how those sex messages from our earlier versions of ourselves affect our current version of ourselves.
Right. And by doing that, we're going to get to a point where you recognize that. I guess, what would you tell the parent right now that they have that 12, 13-year-old boy right now who obviously, is going through puberty and they're so scared, that their son is being woken up with erections every morning and they're, so scared that to just be like, okay, this is how you deal with it. What do you tell those parents?
Yeah. So my work is with adults and my default is always going to be, you need to start to address your own sexual shame so you can show up like a real parent for your child. And that's pretty rough, but you cannot continue this generational sexual shame by being silent with your child.
Right? Or being ashamed.
They deserve better.
Yeah. Or being ashamed that that's what's happening, which is probably what happened when you were a teenager.
Correct.
But you just didn't have anybody to help you deal with it the correct way.
Right. And then I always say, listen, talking about sex to your kids is a hard thing because we all carry this kind of shame around sexual conversation. And so even right? I have daughters who are both 9. I have twins. And I talk about sex every day for a living. And probably it's a little easier for me to talk to them. But I still have to manage my own past selves going like, you can't talk to your kids about their clitoris. And right. I have to manage that within me and show up as a full adult with real, honest information for them so that they can live a less shame-filled life around sex. You just got to do it.
Right. And recognizing that this is normal. You have to understand normal behaviors. I think that's a lot of things is we forget when we were 12 and 13. So then we have our children and we're like, this isn't normal. Actually, it is, which is why you go and you read a bunch of your information on your website or something, because it is normal behavior. I think a lot of times especially in these, Christian, very patriarchal, homes where we forget what happened. And, the story is a lot of, my parents never talked to me about sex, and you're like, so in your mind, you're like, okay, you're dealing with this addiction, now sex addiction or whatever. And you start kind of deconstructing what happened to them. And, if you don't want repeat behavior or you don't want that, then we have to understand what's normal and we have to be okay with normal.
Yes. Like exploration, like
Yeah.
kids touching themselves from the age of 18 months, right? Like I always say that the talk with your kids is not one talk. It's a conversation that starts very early
Yeah.
and matures as they mature. Like you're going to have a million small talks about your genitals and about sex and about consent and about all kinds of things, body autonomy, but it starts really early. And so that when you get to the 12, 11, 12, like you've got a solid foundation and you're just kind of adding bits and pieces here and there. It isn't a conversation you start when they're 12.
Right. And this is kind of a side topic, but I think it's so important as parents to show intimacy with your kids.
Mm.
Not sex, obviously. I think that's a little weird, but I, my husband and I make concerted efforts to show intimacy to our kids, which means that we show times that we can show our kids how much we love each other.
Mm-hmm.
We also make really good efforts that when we're fighting to also help our kids be aware of how we resolved it. So, me and dad were fighting. This is what we, and we talked about it and we forgave. Or, we have these uncomfortable, I guess it's not uncomfortable, but I really want my kids to learn what healthy intimacy is. And that it's okay. Like me and my husband kissing in front of our kids is okay. And I want my kids to see what a healthy relationship with is. Going a little bit backwards with talking about divorce is that a lot of times when we're married, we don't do that, or we lose the ability to do that because we're angry at the other person for whatever reason. And so our kids are getting a picture of unhealthy habits of what intimacy is. So what better time, again, when you are single, to learn what proper and healthy intimacy is and what your needs are so that you can go into another relationship and show your kids, okay, this relationship was unhealthy with your dad or with your mom. It was unhealthy, but look at me now. Look at my intimacy. Look at my relationship now. And we can teach our kids what proper, good relationships are.
Yeah.
A lot of times with divorce, we don't want to fix ourselves because we want to play the victim and we want to blame other people. And so we run right into another relationship with the exact same problems.
Yeah.
And we're never able to get to a point where we're fixing ourselves. And we never want to do that. That's the whole purpose of, using this opportunity as a launch pad for yourself is that you're going to then go into the next relationship better, stronger. And so anyways, I thought that was really important, is that we want to teach our kids healthy relationships.
Absolutely. And I think along that, teaching intimacy, modeling intimacy, like you're talking about, like modeling acts of affection and things like that, comes along with modeling boundary and consent too. Like when my partner is like tickling me, right? And I say, stop, I'm done. They stop.
Yeah.
And our daughters are always watching that and noticing, like when somebody puts a boundary on your body, they stop. And that's what is expected. And that is what happens in our home. And I think that is a form of building intimacy too. Like, oh, I see it's okay to have boundary and nobody is distant from me simply because I have a boundary around my body. Mom and dad still love each other and they still chat and they still have intimacy, and probably even more because they both hold their boundaries really well.
I love this too, because this is going again to the patriarchal society where for years we've taught our daughters to dress appropriately and to cover up and to, not be so sexual and explicit because that draws boys to them. And therefore, and I'm like, oh, please, can we get rid of that? Because we need to be teaching, our boys to be respectful to whatever a girl is wearing, or, and to understand what informed consent is for both parties. And we need to be talking and setting the same expectations and same standards for both our kids, whether you're boy or girl, because we are now living in a day and age where I know that sometimes it's a little bit, I don't know what to do in this position, but it just goes to the same. If you're going to set an expectation for my daughter, you're going to set an expectation for my son.
Right.
And anyways, I love what you're saying. So my last question to you is, what advice would you give everyone to help them feel more confident in themselves, so therefore they feel more confident in their relationships?
Yeah. I think that one of my favorite things to do when it comes to sex is to really understand what you want emotionally out of sex. So we all want different things out of sex, if we really think about it. So one of the things that I have clients do, and your listeners can do, is to think, in my dream sexual scenario, what do I want to feel? What do I want to feel? I want to feel erotic or wild or free or safe or comfortable or whatever those feelings are. And then you can build behaviors behind that. So I want to feel, safe or free. I know that these are the kinds of sexual experiences that can help me feel that way that I maybe didn't feel in my last relationship. So, and that's one of the ways that we can build our confidence, because it's not based on a behavior, it's based on something I want to feel. And so then there's a variety of behaviors that can help me feel that way. But I think sometimes we get really focused on like, oh, I couldn't do this behavior, or I don't feel comfortable doing that thing in sex, when in reality, we all do all of our behaviors. I pet my dog because I want to feel calm, right?
Right.
All of the behaviors we do them because we want to feel something. So a way in which to increase your confidence is to understand what you want to feel first, and then build an arsenal of behaviors that help you feel the way you want to feel, which will help you feel better in sex, and therefore help you feel more confident in yourself and your body and in sex.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And remember, if you haven't had good positive sexual experiences, again, you can learn to be able to have better experiences with yourself and or somebody else. So remember that. And then also, again, get rid of this shame or this guilt that we carry over our head, thinking that we're not deserving of that. Because that's bullcrap.
Yeah.
You are absolutely deserving of exactly what you said, like your dream scenario, and we can learn the behaviors behind it to get there. So, Celeste, you've just been fabulous, and I think our listeners are really going to resonate with this. Again, I know that sometimes this topic is one of those ones where we're like, we don't want to talk about, but it's so needed, so necessary. What you're doing is just fabulous, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here to talk to our listeners today.
Well, thank you, Jill. And the same to you. I think what you do empowering women after divorce is fantastic too. So thank you for having me. It's an honor and a delight. And I hope we see each other again real soon.
I hope so. So let's tell everybody where they can find you if they want to find more information about you.
Yeah, you can find me at drcelesteholbrook.com. That's drcelesteholbrook.com, where you can sign up for a discovery call where we can kind of talk about what's going on. And I can either refer you to some other of my services, or I will refer you out to therapy or trauma specialist or something like that. Like, I can act as a advocate for the things that you might need. Or you can take one of my classes about low libido or painful intercourse. Or you can just download one of my documents. Like, I have a document that is about 20 sex enhancing questions, things you might not think to ask your partner, like, what's your favorite view during sex? So you can find me on my website. You can also find me on social media at Dr. Celeste Holbrook.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Remember, no one dies from divorce. Whatever trial, tribulation you're going through right now, we're going to get through this together, and we're going to give you keys and tips every week to kind of help you recognize that you are strong enough, you are worthy of happiness, and whatever direction you need to do to get there, you are deserving to get there. One step in front of the other, you're going to make it. Appreciate you, Celeste. Thank you so much. Until next week, remember, my book is out in Amazon, in all bookstores in Utah. Check it out. Gives you all the tips you need to know to remember that you just are not going to survive divorce. You can thrive through it. Till next week. Thanks, Celeste.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, follow, and share. I'd love to hear your questions and feedback. You can contact me at community@jillcoyle.com. See you next time. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. Any advice given on the podcast is general and shall not be construed as legal advice.